She was promised to a human. Their first meeting changed fate completely. Leora stood at the edge of the airstrip, gazing out at the vast expanse of Earth's skyline before her. The metallic hum of the spacecrafts that had transported her to this alien world was still fresh in her ears. Yet, the sounds of Earth felt different, louder, more chaotic, and strangely full of life. A cool wind brushed against her skin, reminding her that she was far from the comfortable, familiar lands of Zeltar. Her home, a planet of blue oceans and tall, crystalline towers, felt so distant now. She had been taught since childhood that this moment would come. Her marriage had been arranged long before she had ever been born, a political alliance between Earth and her people, the Zeltarians. The treaty had been signed by both governments years ago, and now she was here to fulfill her part of the bargain. Leora, the daughter of the Zeltarian High Council, would marry a human, a union that would solidify the peace between their two worlds. She felt a pang in her chest at the thought. She had been raised to believe that this marriage was her duty, her responsibility to her people, and yet there was a strange weight to it. Was it truly just a marriage of convenience, or would she one day grow to care for the man she was meant to wed? The spacecraft landed softly behind her, its landing pads hissing as they met the ground. The door opened slowly, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the bright sunlight. Leora's eyes narrowed as she studied him, her betrothed. He was tall, with dark hair and broad shoulders. His face was sharp, yet there was something gentle about the way he held himself. She had expected him to be more rigid, more formal, in keeping with the expectations of her people. But this man, Daniel Crawford, looked different. He walked towards her with an air of confidence, but there was also something else, an openness, a warmth. "Princess Leora?" His voice was deep, rich with the accent of Earth. She nodded, her lips pressed into a tight smile. "Yes, I am she." He extended a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Leora took it. His hand was warm, solid. When he spoke, his words were polite, but there was a curiosity in his eyes that made her pause. "It's an honor to meet you," Daniel said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of genuine interest. "I've heard much about you." Leora studied him carefully, her mind racing. She had been prepared for a formal greeting, the kind that came with arranged marriages between political figures. But Daniel did not seem stiff, nor did he act like someone who had been bound by duty. He was normal in a way that she had not expected. He smiled warmly, and there was no trace of the cold professionalism that Leora had been taught to expect from humans. "I have heard a great deal about you as well," she replied, her voice careful. Her training had taught her to remain composed, even when faced with the unfamiliar. Daniel's smile grew slightly wider, and he gave a small chuckle. "I hope it wasn't all bad." Leora allowed herself a soft laugh, surprised by the way his humor eased the tension that had settled around her. It was a strange feeling. She had expected this meeting to be uncomfortable, full of formality and duty. Yet in this first moment with him, there was an unexpected ease, as if they were two strangers meeting without the burden of tradition weighing them down. "Well, then, I'm glad to hear it," she said, her voice softening just a bit. Daniel gestured toward the waiting vehicle, a sleek, futuristic craft that would take them to the capital city. "Shall we? I'm sure you've had a long journey." Leora nodded, grateful for the distraction. As they walked toward the vehicle, she stole another glance at Daniel. He didn't look like the type of man she had been told to expect, stoic, unemotional, and simply fulfilling his duty. No, Daniel had a warmth about him, something that made him approachable. It was disarming. The ride to the city was smooth, the hum of the vehicle's engines filling the air as they sped through the countryside. Daniel spoke briefly about Earth's history and culture, but his words seemed to fade into the background as Leora's mind wandered. She couldn't help but wonder what her life would be like here on this strange planet, tied to a man she barely knew. The thoughts that had been swirling in her mind since the moment she boarded the ship began to feel more pressing. Was this marriage a true union of hearts, or was it simply a political arrangement, like all the others that had come before it? When they reached the city, Leora was overwhelmed by the sheer size and noise of it. The towering buildings rose high into the sky, their glass facades reflecting the sunlight in a dizzying array of colors. People walked the streets in a hurried, constant motion, while vehicles zoomed by overhead, creating a buzz of sound that was both exciting and overwhelming. Leora had always lived in palaces, surrounded by the grandeur of Zeltar's architecture, but nothing had prepared her for the vibrancy of Earth cities. There was so much life here, so much energy. The hustle and bustle were unlike anything she had ever seen. Daniel led her through the city streets, explaining some of the landmarks as they passed. He seemed to take pride in showing her his world, and Leora appreciated the effort. Despite the overwhelming nature of the city, his calm presence made her feel a little more at ease. After a while, they arrived at the embassy where she would be staying. It was a grand building, though not as imposing as the palace she had left behind. Daniel offered her a formal welcome and gestured to the door. "Please make yourself comfortable. I'll leave you to rest for a bit before we begin the official discussions tomorrow." Leora nodded, her thoughts spinning. "Thank you," she said, trying to muster some of the formality she had been raised to exhibit. Yet there was something in the way Daniel had treated her, something that made her feel less like a foreign dignitary and more like an equal. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Leora," he said, his voice soft, "I know this is all very overwhelming. But I want you to know that you're not alone here. If you need anything, anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." Her heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his words. She was not used to such openness, especially not from someone who was supposed to be nothing more than a political partner. But in that moment, she felt a flicker of something more than just duty or obligation. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quieter now, almost unsure. She watched as Daniel left, the door closing softly behind him. Leora turned to face the room. She was here now in this strange new world, and the weight of what lay ahead settled in her chest. Her marriage to Daniel would change everything. Whether for better or for worse, she did not yet know. But one thing was certain: their first meeting had already changed the course of her life in ways she could never have predicted. As she gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, she couldn't help but wonder if this was truly what fate had planned for her. Or if, perhaps, there was more to this story than anyone had imagined. Leora woke early the next morning, the unfamiliar sounds of Earth filling her ears. The distant hum of vehicles, the rustling of the wind through trees, and the occasional voices of people outside her window all seemed foreign. Yet there was a strange sense of peace in the chaos. She stood by the window, looking out over the city once again, watching as people hurried about their day. The embassy was quiet in the early hours, and she found herself alone with her thoughts. The discussions that had been planned for later that day felt overwhelming. The weight of her duty to her people, her responsibility to the alliance, pressed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, something about the way Daniel had spoken to her the night before, the sincerity in his words, left a lingering warmth in her chest. It was a feeling she couldn't quite shake. She had been trained all her life to understand politics, diplomacy, and the importance of maintaining alliances. But in all her education, she had never been prepared for the emotions that came with it. She had never been taught how to navigate the space between duty and desire. The growing connection she felt to Daniel was a complication she hadn't anticipated. After a quick breakfast, Leora dressed in the formal attire provided by the embassy. It was similar to the royal garments she wore back on Zeltar, though Earth's designs were simpler, less intricate. She took a moment to adjust her appearance in the mirror, trying to settle her nerves. Today was the day that everything would be decided. Her future was about to be mapped out in a series of meetings, speeches, and handshakes. When she arrived in the embassy's grand meeting room, Daniel was already there, waiting for her. He looked as composed as ever, but there was a light in his eyes that suggested he, too, was feeling the weight of the moment. He greeted her with a respectful nod, his smile more genuine than the formal ones she had grown accustomed to. It was a stark contrast to the stiff, rehearsed gestures she had seen in her own court. "Good morning, Leora," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I hope you slept well." Leora nodded, offering him a smile in return. "I did, thank you. Earth is quite different from Zeltar." Daniel chuckled softly. "I imagine so. It takes a bit of getting used to, but you'll find that there's a certain charm to it." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A charm?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes. Earth isn't as perfect as Zeltar, but there's something real about it. Something raw. People here, they're not afraid to be themselves." Leora considered his words carefully. On Zeltar, everyone played their part, fitting into the roles assigned to them from birth. There was a sense of order, of control, that gave their society strength. But perhaps there was something to Daniel's words. Maybe Earth was more unpredictable, but in that unpredictability, there was a freedom that was hard to ignore. "I will keep that in mind," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Perhaps I can learn to appreciate it." The meeting began shortly after, and Leora was introduced to a series of Earth diplomats and high-ranking officials. They spoke at length about the importance of the alliance, about trade agreements, military cooperation, and the future of the two worlds. The discussions were long and tedious, full of terms and concepts Leora had heard 1,000 times. Yet as the hours passed, her mind often wandered back to Daniel. She couldn't help it. There was something about him that was different from anyone she had met before. His openness, his willingness to listen, made her feel like she wasn't just a figurehead or a tool to be used for political gain. He saw her as a person, not as the princess of Zeltar or a pawn in a political game. And that, more than anything, made her feel a strange sense of hope. At lunch, Daniel invited her to join him in the embassy's garden. The moment they stepped outside, the warm sunlight greeted them, and the cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Leora took a deep breath, savoring the freshness of the air. The city around them felt distant here, as if they were in a small, peaceful world of their own. "This is beautiful," Leora said, looking around. "Is this a common sight on Earth?" "Not everywhere," Daniel replied. "But where I grew up in the countryside, there are a lot of places like this. Quiet, peaceful." She turned to him, her curiosity piqued. "The countryside?" He nodded. "Yes, I grew up in a small town. It's a far cry from the city life I live now, but it's home. It's where I learned everything that matters to me." Leora felt a spark of interest. She had always been surrounded by nobility, politics, and luxury, but the idea of a simpler life, a life rooted in the earth itself, intrigued her. She wondered what it would be like to live in such a place, far from the demands of royal duties and the expectations of her people. "What was it like?" she asked, genuinely interested. Daniel's expression softened as he thought back. "It was quiet. Not much excitement, but there was a sense of community. People took care of each other, and there was always something to do. It was grounding." Leora nodded, lost in thought. The idea of such a life seemed so foreign to her, yet it also felt strangely appealing. In Zeltar, everyone had their place. Their roles were defined, their futures planned out from the moment they were born. But here on Earth, Daniel spoke of a life that seemed free, unbound by the expectations that had shaped her entire existence. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the garden, talking about their worlds, their cultures, and their lives. The more they spoke, the more Leora realized how little she knew about the man she was meant to marry. He was not just a political ally or a tool for diplomacy. He was a person, with dreams, hopes, and a life that was entirely his own. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Leora felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced since her arrival. She looked at Daniel, feeling a strange connection growing between them, something that went beyond the political union they were supposed to form. It was as if, in this brief time, they had begun to understand each other in a way that was rare, even for those of their status. "I'm glad you suggested this," Leora said, her voice soft. "I needed a moment to breathe." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Daniel replied, his smile warm. "I think it's important to take a step back sometimes, to remember that there's more to life than just the business of politics." Leora looked down at the grass beneath her feet, her mind swirling with new thoughts. She had come to Earth with a singular purpose: to fulfill her duty, to marry a man she had never met, and to strengthen the alliance between their two worlds. But now, standing here with Daniel, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to their connection than just duty. Could it be possible that, despite everything, they were meant for more than just a political union? Could they somehow find a way to create something real, something beyond the expectations of their people? As the evening wore on and they returned to the embassy, Leora felt a sense of uncertainty settle in her chest. She had come to Earth to play her part, to fulfill her role as a princess, a symbol of political unity. But now she was beginning to question if there was another path, one that didn't follow the script she had been given. And in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Daniel had changed something fundamental inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Her first meeting with him had already begun to alter the course of her life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The days following Leora's arrival on Earth passed in a blur of meetings, formalities, and events. The diplomats, politicians, and military officials who had welcomed her barely gave her a moment to breathe. Every part of her day was planned, every moment accounted for. She found herself caught in a whirlwind of obligations, with very little time to reflect on the strange new world around her. But despite the busy schedule, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. Their conversations had left an impression on her, more than she had expected. The lightness in his voice, the ease with which they spoke, made her feel as though their connection wasn't just a political arrangement. It felt real. Every conversation, every moment spent in his company made her question the nature of her upcoming marriage. At night, when she lay in bed, she found herself replaying their talks in her mind. Daniel's words about Earth, about his childhood in the countryside, stayed with her. He had spoken of it with such fondness, a far cry from the royal life she had been raised to expect. It was a simple life, but one filled with meaning and warmth. But Leora was still a princess, still bound by duty. She couldn't ignore that, no matter how much she found herself drawn to him. She knew the expectations placed on her were clear. Her marriage to Daniel was the cornerstone of the alliance between Zeltar and Earth. It was her responsibility to solidify this union, to ensure the future of both worlds. Yet there were moments when she saw the world through Daniel's eyes, moments when the weight of her duty seemed to fade, even if only for an instant. His life was simple but full. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live a life without the constant pressure of politics, a life where love and happiness were not dictated by treaties and agreements. One morning, Daniel invited her to visit a military base. As a member of Earth's armed forces, he had been stationed at several locations across the planet, overseeing various projects and training exercises. The invitation wasn't unusual. Leora had been expected to meet Earth's leaders and military figures as part of the alliance. But this time, there was something different. Daniel had insisted she come along personally, offering to show her a side of Earth she hadn't seen before. When they arrived at the base, Leora was struck by the stark contrast to the busy city she had been staying in. The sprawling complex was set against a backdrop of vast open fields, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and metal. Soldiers marched in precise formations, their faces stern and determined. The sound of drills and equipment echoed across the grounds, creating a sharp, steady rhythm that seemed to pulse through the air. Daniel seemed perfectly at ease in this environment, his commanding presence unquestioned. He moved through the base with a sense of authority, exchanging greetings and offering instructions with ease. Leora followed him, taking in the sights and sounds of Earth's military, which were so different from the ways of Zeltar. The soldiers were hardworking, disciplined, and strong, and it was clear that their loyalty to Earth ran deep. As they walked, Daniel turned to her with a smile. "I think you'll like this part. It's where I spent most of my time before the Alliance." Leora raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Before the Alliance, I didn't realize you were involved in the military." Daniel's smile softened, and for a brief moment there was a hint of something more personal in his eyes. I served for many years. It's a different kind of life, but it taught me a lot about myself." Leora didn't reply immediately, her mind racing. There was so much she still didn't know about Daniel. Despite the time they had spent together, there were still pieces of his life that remained a mystery. Yet every time she learned something new about him, she felt that growing connection deepening, and she couldn't help but wonder if their futures were meant to be more than just a political union. They spent hours touring the base, watching soldiers train and observing military strategies. Daniel spoke about his time in the field, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He was passionate about his work, about the role he had played in Earth's military growth, and Leora couldn't help but admire his dedication. But as they walked through the complex, she couldn't shake the feeling that her own life had been so different. Her existence had been defined by her position, by the crown she would one day wear, and by the expectations placed on her by her people. She had never known the kind of freedom that Daniel had. When the tour was over, Daniel took her aside, leading her to a quiet corner of the base where the noise of the drills was muffled. They sat on a bench together, the cool air brushing against their faces as they took a moment to rest. "I didn't realize how much you've sacrificed," Leora said quietly, her voice sincere. "To be a part of the military, to serve your country, it's admirable." Daniel smiled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that made Leora pause. "It's not about sacrifice, Leora," he said softly. "It's about purpose. I've always believed that we find meaning in what we do, in the lives we touch, and in the choices we make." Leora looked down, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the bench. I've never had the freedom to choose my path. My life has always been decided for me. Daniel turned to face her, his expression gentle but knowing. I understand. I can't imagine what it must be like to have your entire future mapped out before you. But I think there's more to your life than duty and politics. You have more control over your future than you realize. Leora felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mix of longing and confusion. She had always believed that her duty came first, that her role as a princess and a symbol of the alliance was the most important thing she could offer. But Daniel's words made her question everything she had been taught. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I can't just walk away from my duty. My people depend on me. This marriage, this alliance, it's not just about me. It's about the future of Zeltar and Earth. I know, Daniel said quietly, but I also know that you deserve more than just being a figurehead in a political game. You deserve a life of your own choosing. Leora looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were like a balm, soothing the doubts and fears that had plagued her since arriving on Earth. She had always believed that her duty was all that mattered, but now she wasn't so sure. Could she truly choose her own path? Could she have both the future she had been promised and the life she longed for? They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. Leora didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could make the choices Daniel was suggesting. Her world had always been one of duty, of sacrifice for the greater good. But the more she spent time with him, the more she realized that there might be another way, a way where she could be true to herself and to him. When the silence stretched too long, Daniel spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to decide anything right now. But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll be here. If you need someone to talk to, or if you need a friend, you don't have to face this alone. Leora looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt a spark of hope. She wasn't sure what choices she could make, or what paths she could follow, but she knew one thing for sure. Her future was no longer set in stone. The days that followed were filled with moments of doubt and introspection for Leora. Every conversation with Daniel left her more confused, more torn between her duty and the strange, blossoming feelings that were growing in her heart. She had always been taught that duty came first. Her role as the daughter of the Zeltarian High Council, her responsibility to her people, had been her guiding force her entire life. But Daniel's presence, his warmth, and his way of seeing the world had started to make her question everything. There were moments when the weight of her obligations felt almost unbearable. As the day of her official betrothal to Daniel grew closer, Leora could feel the pressure mounting. The political leaders of both Earth and Zeltar were eager for the marriage to take place. It would seal the alliance between the two worlds, ensuring peace and prosperity for generations to come. But as the days passed, Leora felt more and more trapped in the role she had been given. The more she thought about Daniel, the more her heart ached. He was not like the other humans she had met. He was kind, thoughtful, and real in a way that made her feel like she could truly be herself around him. But she couldn't forget the reasons why she was here. She was meant to marry him for the good of both their worlds, not because of personal feelings. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Leora found herself alone in her room, staring out of the window at the city below. The lights twinkled like distant stars, and for a brief moment she felt small, like she was just a tiny piece in a vast puzzle she couldn't control. She had spent so much of her life preparing for this moment, for the union that would solidify the future of her people. But now that the moment was approaching, it felt less like a dream and more like a heavy weight she was expected to carry alone. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. She turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Daniel standing in the doorway. He had been a constant presence in her life since her arrival, but now, with the betrothal looming, seeing him felt different. She had no idea what to say to him anymore, no idea how to navigate the feelings that were stirring inside her. Leora, his voice was gentle, as if sensing her inner turmoil. I thought we could talk. I know things have been overwhelming. Leora swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. As he entered, she noticed the way he looked at her, his gaze soft and full of understanding. He wasn't just here as her future husband or a political partner. He was here as someone who cared, someone who had become, in many ways, her only true friend on this strange planet. "I don't know what to do anymore," Leora confessed quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything seems so complicated. I came here thinking I knew what my future would look like, but now I'm not so sure." Daniel walked toward her slowly, his expression thoughtful. He didn't rush to speak, letting the silence stretch for a moment as if he was carefully choosing his words. He understood the pressure she was under, and he knew that there was more at play here than just political alliances. "I can't imagine what you're going through, Leora," he said at last. "This isn't just about you or me, it's about the future of two worlds, I know that. But I also know that you deserve more than just to be a piece in a larger game. You deserve to make your own choices." Leora's heart twisted in her chest at his words. She wanted to believe him, to trust that there was a way out of the path that had been set for her. But the reality of her position was undeniable. She was a princess, a symbol of her people's future. Her marriage to Daniel was not just a personal matter, it was a matter of state. The lives of millions of Zeltarians and humans depended on it. "I've been taught that my duty comes first," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That my life isn't my own, that my choices are meant to serve something greater than myself. I don't know how to be anything else." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "You are more than your duty, Leora. I see that every time we talk. You're more than a political figurehead. You're a person, and you have every right to choose what kind of life you want to live." Leora looked down, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had spent so much of her life preparing for the role she was born into that she had forgotten what it meant to live for herself. What did she want? What did she need? She had always known her duty, but she had never truly considered her own desires, her own happiness. "I wish I could believe that," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know if I can just walk away from everything. My people, my responsibilities, they've always been my focus. I don't know how to leave that behind." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was simple, but it sent a warmth through her that made her heart race. "I'm not asking you to leave everything behind," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm asking you to consider what you want in the future. Whether it's with me or without me, I just want you to know that you deserve the chance to live for yourself." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Leora felt torn, like she was being pulled in two different directions. On one hand, there was her duty, the future of her people, the promise she had made to her world. On the other, there was Daniel, a man who had shown her a different way of life, a life where choices weren't dictated by political need, but by love and freedom. "I don't know what to do," Leora whispered, the words feeling like a confession. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I know, but whatever happens, you don't have to do it alone." His words were like a lifeline, pulling her from the sea of doubt and confusion she had been drowning in. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leora realized that maybe she didn't have to make this decision alone. Maybe she didn't have to choose between duty and love. Maybe there was a way to have both, to find a path that was hers and hers alone. The sound of a door opening in the hallway interrupted their moment, and Leora quickly pulled her hand away, stepping back as if to compose herself. She knew that this conversation was far from over, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was more to her life than what had been planned for her. Maybe she could choose her own future. The next few days were filled with more meetings and discussions, but Leora's mind was no longer fully focused on them. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel, to the conversation they had shared, and to the decision that loomed over her. She couldn't ignore her duty, but for the first time she didn't feel like she had to abandon herself to fulfill it. She could still make her own choices. As the days passed, Leora found herself standing at the crossroads of her destiny. The betrothal ceremony was still on the horizon, but she no longer saw it as an inevitable conclusion. She saw it as a choice she could make for herself. And in that choice, she knew one thing for sure. Her future was no longer written in stone. The days leading up to the ceremony felt like a blur to Leora. Each day was filled with last-minute preparations, discussions, and ceremonies, all designed to celebrate the union that would secure the future of two worlds. But as the date of the betrothal approached, Leora found it harder to focus on the events surrounding her. Her mind kept drifting to Daniel and the conversation they had shared. The decision she had been avoiding for so long was now pressing on her in a way she couldn't ignore. She stood in front of the mirror that morning, carefully adjusting the royal gown that had been prepared for her. The fabric was rich, shimmering under the light, but all it seemed to do was remind her of the weight of her responsibilities. The crown she would wear, the title she would inherit, all of it felt like a cage she could never escape. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who had been molded by duty, a woman whose choices had never truly been her own. The door to her room opened, and Daniel entered. His presence, as always, was a comforting one. He had been a steady part of her life since her arrival on Earth, but today, everything felt different. There was an unspoken tension between them now, a tension that had built over the past few days as their bond had deepened. She could no longer ignore the pull she felt toward him, the way he made her question everything she had been taught. "Leora," Daniel said gently, his voice soft as he walked toward her. "Are you ready?" She turned to face him, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "As ready as I can be." He reached out and touched her arm lightly, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he said, his words filled with quiet sincerity. Leora's heart raced at the sound of his voice, at the way he spoke as if her decision mattered to him, as if she mattered. She had never allowed herself to imagine what a life with Daniel might look like. She had always believed that her duty was her sole purpose, that the future of her people came before any personal desires. But now, standing here with him, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know what I want anymore," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I came here thinking I had no choice, that my future was already decided for me. But the more I'm with you, the more I realize that I can't just ignore what's in my heart." Daniel's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her. "I want you to be happy, Leora. I want you to choose what feels right for you, not just for everyone else. We can still make a difference together, but it has to be because we both choose it." Her eyes filled with emotion as she looked at him. She had never heard anyone speak to her this way, especially not someone who knew the weight of her responsibilities. He wasn't asking her to choose him, he was asking her to choose herself. For the first time, she realized that she had the power to shape her own destiny. "I've been so focused on what I have to do, on what's expected of me," she said quietly. "But I'm afraid, Daniel, I'm afraid that if I make the wrong choice, I'll let everyone down. I'm afraid of losing everything." "You won't lose everything," Daniel replied, his voice reassuring. "The people of Zeltar will still have you, and Earth will still benefit from this alliance, but you deserve more than to be a symbol of duty. You deserve a life that's yours to live, not one that's dictated by anyone else." Leora's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the heavy burden that had weighed on her shoulders begin to lift. The uncertainty, the doubt, it all started to fade away as she looked at him. She realized that she had been living in fear of the future for so long that she had forgotten how to live for herself. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to make this decision," Leora admitted, her voice shaking with vulnerability. "What if I make the wrong choice?" Daniel smiled gently, his hand brushing her cheek. "There's no such thing as a wrong choice when it comes to your heart, Leora. Whatever you decide, I'll be here with you." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the weight of the world between them. Leora felt as if the decision was within her reach, but it was still so hard to grasp. Her entire life had been dedicated to her duty to her people. But now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't have to give up everything she was to create something meaningful. The sound of footsteps outside her room interrupted the silence, and Leora quickly turned, wiping away a tear that had fallen without her noticing. "I'm supposed to be ready for the ceremony," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel nodded, understanding. "You don't have to do this right now. You don't have to go through with it if you don't want to. We can find another way." But Leora knew, deep down, that she couldn't keep avoiding the truth. She couldn't keep hiding from the reality of her own desires. She had to face the decision that had been hanging over her for so long, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. "I need to go through with it," she said softly, her voice gaining strength. "Not because I have to, but because I choose to." Daniel's expression softened with understanding. "Then let's do this together." The ceremony that followed was every bit as grand and elaborate as she had imagined it would be. The halls of the embassy were filled with dignitaries, politicians, and leaders from both Earth and Zeltar. There was music, there were speeches, and there were promises exchanged. But as Leora stood at the altar, facing Daniel, she realized that none of it mattered. What mattered was the choice she had made. As the formalities continued, Leora found herself not thinking about her duty, not worrying about the future of her people or the alliance that had brought her here. She was thinking about her own future, about the life she wanted to build with Daniel. She had chosen him, not because she was bound by obligation, but because, for the first time, she had chosen herself. When it was time to exchange vows, Leora took Daniel's hands in her own. Her voice was steady as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of her decision. I vow to choose my own path, no matter where it may lead. I vow to stand by you not because we are bound by duty, but because we have chosen each other. I choose you, Daniel Crawford, not as a political ally, but as a partner, as someone I love. The words felt freeing, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had made her choice, and it was one that was hers alone to make. When it was Daniel's turn, his voice was filled with the same certainty. I vow to stand by you, Leora, not because of what the future holds, but because I believe in you. I believe in us. I choose you not as a princess or a symbol of your people, but as the woman I love. The crowd cheered, but for Leora, everything else faded into the background. She wasn't a princess anymore. She wasn't just a symbol of her people's future. She was Leora, and she had made her own future. A future that was shaped by her choices, her desires, and the love she had found with Daniel. As the ceremony ended and the celebrations began, Leora felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, and though the path ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. It was her path to walk, and she was no longer afraid.